Go ahead.
Hello, it's 7 o'clock, Tuesday, 777. This is George.
And Bonnie.
I love her. And I didn't tell anybody what we're going to talk about, only that we were going to talk about a topic that somebody made a statement about last week. And the statement that was made, and we'll get into it later, is Yeshua and the apostles used the Septuagint. Now,
make sure I move it.
To clear, I wanted to talk about that first, but due to the fact that a couple of days ago we got a couple questions asked us, and when we answered the questions, the person kept going to other topics without really, like she really didn't want to know what the answer for that topic is.
Hey, Tom. Hi, Yvonne.
So yesterday, I sat down and wrote out a little couple-page clarification. Here's what we wrote. We're not here to get you to your heaven. You have preachers for that. A person contacted us and stated what her denomination was brainwashing her with. Then she stated that we say you have to be a Jew to get to that small road. Has anybody ever heard us say that, or anything that would hint that you must be a Jew? If you want to pretend to be a Jew, go ahead. If you want to pretend to be a Christian, again, go ahead. We really don't care. Just like believability. Unless I'm wrong, we tell no one to believe what we say. But to study with your head being buried in the sand along with your brainwashing. See, when you do that, when you pull your head up out of the sand, you pull your brainwashing right up with you again. There are people who should spend years studying John. We really believe that. And then there are people who are trying to convince themselves by doing Bible verse jumping First Chronicles, Second Chronicles, and Ezra, and putting her mindset further and further into the crowd of that large road going to that huge gate. If you read our book, Study, Your Eternity Depends on It, you find a lot of topics that bring you to the point of you must do your own study.
What you always say.
Not rely on us. Is there a problem with being a Jew? No. Is there a problem with being a Christian? No. Is there a problem with either one brainwashing you to believe totally like them? Yes. If you don't do your own study and not follow any type of brainwashing, well, then you deserve where you and that large crowd will walk to. If you don't read our book and you don't study scripture and you love that warm fuzzies you get from your pastor's leading, see, he always tells you what he wants you to hear and what you want to know. Well, then don't worry here on earth. Don't be concerned about your after death, or worry about the ones you help to follow you to that large road towards that huge gate. Continue your life and your influence on your family, so your road gets a larger crowd than before. Don't worry, be happy. You won't be there alone. You will see everyone you helped to brainwash because of your unwillingness to divorce yourself from the warm fuzzies of others to get to the truth. As you can tell, we were not real happy with the conversation.
Your brother is on.
And we weren't happy. You know, I don't care. If people want to ask questions, that's great. But don't try to put your denominational philosophy. It shines through just like anything would to anybody that has any studying behind them at all. As you can tell, we were a little. My blood pressure went up the last 2 days.
It's okay. All done now.
Anyway, now that we're away from that,
Yeah.
we're talking about the statement made last week was Yeshua and the apostles used the Septuagint, and that's Septuagint, Septuagint, or Septuagint. So we thought that for clarification, we should take a Tuesday topic about what it really is. Now, I don't know if anybody else looked it up, but I spent a couple of days trying to figure out what was really said. Now, the Septuagint is a Greek version of the Tanakh, the Old Testament in our English. So the Septuagint just may be the earliest Greek translation. Earliest Greek translation. It was written somewhere around 3rd century BC. Some biblical scholars believe that it was translated from the Hebrew for the Hebrew people in Egypt. Why? They said that Greek was the language of the day, and it would become the language of the future. So the Tanakh had to be translated into Greek so those Hebrews could understand their own Tanakh, Old Testament. It is believed that it was written by 70 scholars, and they were the ones who translated Tanakh into the Greek language.
Do you think those 70 were Greek? That sounds like a silly question.
They were Greek scholars. And now if you really think about it, the Greeks at one time thought that they were so superior to other people. And they had Aristotle and Socrates and all those. And they were smart. They were well advanced in years. But they didn't want the Bible to be only in the Hebrew language. With the Bible back then, 3 centuries before Yeshua was here, it was only in the Hebrew language. And they wanted it to be in their language because they didn't want to be associated with the lower life of the Hebrews as far as the Greeks were concerned. That's why they really wanted to translate, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, was that after, didn't Israel get, I don't want to say captured by the Greeks? Do you know what the word I'm looking for?
Well, Israel was taken over and ran by Greeks, Romans, and a whole bunch of different. In the book, we have at least 7 different countries that came in and invaded Israel and took them over. But it's one of them that were the leading forces of Israel, yes.
Okay, so that wasn't done then.
No,
the
it
translation
was done.
wasn't done.
The Greeks thought that it was going to be, everybody would have to know Greek. You wouldn't have to know it.
So they did that kind of in advance of.
Yeah, they did it.
So to speak.
200 to 300 years before Yeshua was here, they did it for that purpose, to infiltrate the culture of the Greeks into all the world. But anyway, she's a little bit ahead of me.
Sorry.
We read from one person who may be a lot smarter than us, and they made the next statement. Yeshua learned in the Greek, yet he spoke Aramaic. Someone else said that the Hebrew language was more of a clergy and those religious scholars would understand. Our question was, would it be who was more clergy or cleric or more of a religious scholar than Yeshua was? What amazes us is that writers and biblical scholars believe they know what Greek biblical writing Yeshua used. We even read somewhere that people wondered if they were holding the one Septuagint that Yeshua held. How would we know? Or even think that Yeshua used a translation of the original in another language, be it Greek or any other? Now, please don't anyone get offended by the next writing, but we state, be on your guard. There are people who are trying to help that make statements, yet we find that in reality has no believability whatsoever. Yet people grab it as gospel. And they're doing what they think is right. And the preachers, and think about it, the preachers go out there and they preach what they have been taught by in a university or in a college or in a correspondence course or in their own studies, because they've got this influence of the past and influence of the present.
So they're kind of teaching what they've always been taught.
And that's true. They're teaching what they've been taught, and in our book study, I tell a story about I had a conversation with a gentleman that was at a funeral one day, and he says, "Well, at least we know all the writers of the Old New Testament were Christians." And my little flare went up, and I asked him. I said, "Well, I don't want to sound ignorant, but can you name me a couple?" He says, "Well, John." I said, "Well, wasn't John a Jewish fisherman, a Hebrew fisherman? He went out in the lake, caught with his brother, and worked with his family He said, "Well, we know Matthew was." Well, yeah, he was a Hebrew, but he wasn't Matthew a Jew that was hated by his fellow Jews because he was a tax collector for the Romans. And then he said, "Paul." And I said, "Well, didn't Paul himself say he was a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee, taught by Gamaliel or whatever the gentleman's name was?" So I would think that if he said he was a Pharisee and not he used to be, wouldn't that mean that he was still considered himself a Jew or a Hebrew? Well, the guy got mad and walked away. And in all reality, I started to think, because this gentleman said that he was a preacher for 40 years. And he taught in the best universities. And he gave speeches in the biggest seminars around the world. And I thought, if somebody is that spiritual and leading people with a denominational philosophy that has no real biblical backing, then he's just teaching people what he has been taught by others instead of what the scripture really says. She keeps moving it over, I keep moving it back.
Well, let's see the cross in the back.
But we're getting back to the Septuagint. If you follow this theory, that's your business. Now, I know I just stated we had a long talk in between what I wrote, but you want me to read it again? Okay, well, I know that's what you're thinking. You're going, what in the world that old buzzard talking about? All right. Be on your guard. There are people who are trying to help that make statements, yet we find that in reality has no believability whatsoever. Yet people grab it as gospel because that's what they've heard in their churches, what they've heard in their Bible studies, what they've heard in their on TV. or going out to see evangelists or whatever. If you follow that theory, that's your business. One statement is, and this is by the atheists, and not by the atheists. This is what somebody said that in a speech, or I read it, and it says the atheists use the term BCE. That stands for before the common era. In other words, before Yeshua was born. Instead of BC, like the true believers do. You know, it stands for before Christ. That's what the Christians say. But the Hebrews say BCE, before Common Era. We found that statement totally false. See, the Hebrews use BCE, not BC. And if the atheists use a term that the nationality of Yeshua would use, that doesn't make the original term wrong, unless you want to believe as the atheists do. In other words, when you study for truth. Don't study for what she knows and what I know, or what your pastor teaches, or what your teacher teaches you, or what Bible study you go to, or what your denomination, your church, or whatever, what they know. Study to try to find truth. You may find out that it lines up with your church. Maybe.
We got some more people too.
Pardon?
George is there.
Yeah, George.
In
Rich is there. Hi, Rich. Hi, Jim.
Jim's there.
We got a fivesome going.
Yay!
Okay. To us, if a so-called renowned, always believable biblical scholar makes a false statement, like the gentleman that I was telling you about, it's still a false statement, believed by maybe millions and millions, because that scholar said so. That statement is and will always be wrong. It doesn't matter who or how many fall into his trap or are on his mailing list going to that huge gate. We in no way are smart enough, or let me restate. We in no way are as smart as those biblical scholars. They quote, remember, and make statements that may guide millions and millions. They want a following and want to guide you so you believe just like them. In all reality, I have found very few preachers who really mean it when they say, don't believe what he says. But they say, this is what Scripture says, now believe it. Very few people I've ever met have really said, don't believe what I say. You need to study. I can't live your life. I can't walk you down your road. I can't get you to heaven. That's your choice. But we found one writing that stated Yeshua would have used the Hebrew Tanakh, not the Greek Septuagint, which we also agree with. But unless you were actually there, we nor anyone can prove their point. And really, would it make any difference to you or to him?
Tom says, I have never heard that statement before you said it.
Last week it was stated by Dallas that people had to realize that the Yeshua and the apostles would have used the Septuagint. I already explained the Septuagint was written, it was a Greek translation of the Tanakh, the Old Testament. So that's what he stated. And I can't say he's wrong, but I just read a whole bunch of things about how I think that it would take a stretch of the imagination for me. Well, for you people.
Yeah, Tom, if you're talking about that word,
Septuagint.
I'd never heard that word before.
It took me a while. Somebody already got off. Look at her.
Hey, that's okay.
I don't blame you. I wouldn't want to listen to me either. Along with the Septuagint, you have another writing called the
Apocrypha.
that so-called, some call it the biblical.
Apocrypha.
As you can tell, I can't even pronounce that one. And those are, and what the Apocrypha, I'm glad you said that real loud that time. The Apocrypha really were undocumented statements by authors, and some even have doubtful origin. Yet they were included in the Septuagint and the Latin Vulgate.
Tom says no. It's not the word. It's like no. Don't believe me. Study for yourself. He's never heard anybody say that statement besides you.
No.
Which is true.
Well, that's because I know how smart I am. Don't believe what I say. Okay.
But anyway.
Yeah, they are included, the undoubtful origin, and they are some of them are included in the Septuagint and the Latin Vulgate. Vulgate, Vulgate. Yet do not appear in the Tanakh, the original Hebrew Bible of the Old Testament. Interesting, isn't it? Were they trying to appease someone or wanting some kind of notoriety when they tried to translate those? Who knows? Yet if you know that those two included statements of doubtful origin and unknown authenticity, is that a word?
Authenticity.
Yeah, authenticity.
That's a word.
That's why I got her here. Would that be adding to your word? We did not find one person who made that statement. I said that wrong. We did find one person that made this statement. The text of the Septuagint, excuse me, is contained in a few early, but not necessarily reliable manuscripts. So what this person believes is that some of these unknown and doubtful, undocumented writings just might be better off to be taken with a grain of salt. Who knows unless you are the divine origin yourself? Now we're going to talk about, that was the talk about the Septuagint. And now we're going to talk about the Vulgate. Some very smart gentleman was here last week for supposed to be 1-2 days, but he was here for like 6 days. And we had a good conversation about that, right, George? Some also believe that the Vulgate, which was a Latin translation of both the Old Testament, the Tanakh, and the New, we believe the Vulgate was in somewhere around the 4th century by a Saint Jerome of the Catholic faith. Some believe it should be followed and believed. We would have to surmise that statement comes from only one faith in religion. Like we state, if the Septuagint and the Vulgate have statements of doubtful origin by unknown and undocumented authors, we have a very hard time believing Yeshua would have used either one or studied either. Yeah, I know the Vulgate was 300 years after Yeshua was here, but the Septuagint was here, and that's what the gentleman stated. Yes, yeah. People, you need to do your own study. Like we always say, don't believe us because we say it. Stand tall, believe what you want, and when you stand in front of Yeshua, and he says, "Who are you?" or "I never knew you," don't complain, whine, or blame others because you are too busy to divorce yourself from all the brainwashing of your past so you study for truth. Remember, enjoy the walk. Enjoy the crowd on your road. Don't worry, be happy. Study to try to get on the small road. Again, don't complain.
One thing I was thinking while you were talking about the ministers, what they teach, what they're taught, and all that kind of stuff. Scripture states that they'll be held to a higher
Teachers and preachers are held to a higher standard,
that's the word.
because they're teaching people. They're supposed to teach people what the word says, not what the translation says. And the text we got a couple of days ago was bringing up a lot of stuff that preachers and teachers have been telling them for years.
So
for a long time. And most preachers that have went through the universities know about Yeshua. They know the name. They know that was his original name. But because of society and history of what they've been taught their whole life, they don't use his real name.
Which is why I think you tell people to not believe your way. That they need to do the study on their own.
Well, when we first started studying, we more or less had to divorce ourselves, because you went all the way through school when you were a little bitty kid, all the way up through your adulthood. You were associated with church and teachings and all that. And one time we got the feeling that wasn't even his real name. And I can't tell you the exact date, time, place. I know the place and all that. But unless you study, and that's why we wrote the book. That's why we wrote this book, and why the next one's coming out about what road. And it's topics just like the one we got out now. But we don't want people to believe what we write. We want to tell people, here's a different way of looking at a lot of topics. Here's a way that we found spiritual. And that's that's what every preacher's going to tell you. Oh, this is the way you should learn it, because that's the way our old guys did it. I'm getting old now, so I'm one of the guys that did it. But we believe that when you study Scripture, you got to study Scripture. Don't take our word for it. Don't take my word for it. Don't take her word for it. Well, and when you go to church, when the preacher says something, if you don't take notes and go home and go, wait a minute, that's not what that really said. When you find that, I don't think you should go up and have an argument with the guy or the gal or a teacher. But understand truth. You got to divorce yourself from all that brainwashing to understand. See, when when Dallas said that about the Septuagint, a little light bulb went off in me and said, I got to look that up. I got to find out there's got to be more to it than just a Greek translation. And then the more I looked, the more I found people should understand.
I think you have a lot more sensitive light bulb than most.
Sometimes she says my light bulb burnt out.
I do not.
But
you've been doing this for a lot of years, and that's why you tell people if they don't do it on their own, and you would rather they dug into it and try to prove you wrong.
Oh yeah. But this topic tonight, when I got into the Vulgate, it's by the Latin, which we know the Catholics, or the Catholic Bible was written, and it was by Jerome in 3rd, 4th century after BC or AD. Now, I'm not saying to not believe what the Vulgate or the Septuagint says, but study it, and then study the original to try to find out, are they telling their denominational philosophy, or are they telling what the scriptures say? We've come up with, George knows it, we've come up with a couple of topics that, as far as I'm concerned, would blow the lid off of a lot of people's philosophy about those leading and how bad and how good you have to take scripture. It isn't all black and white like the books. There's a lot of studying that goes into it and a lot of thinking. And when something pops into your head, here's how, Tom asked before, how do you study? When something pops into your head, find everything you can about that topic. Let's say something pops into your head, Satan. Don't stop by just going, oh, he's a bad guy. Study where scripture talks about it.
See what Tom asked?
Study. Tom asked a question.
Yeah, while you were going there, he was.
Are they
telling their truth or the truth?
Well, I think you're right. I think they're telling their truth. If they're not telling their truth, then let me put it this way. If they're not telling their truth, you wouldn't have to divorce yourself from their teachings, from their brainwashing.
Well, like you started off with Satan.
Well,
don't just take what you've always
known. Or the flood. Like we stated before about the beginning of the world. Did it really do it in 9 days?
It was a longer week that week.
did it really happen in the days that they said? Was there? Why is the Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 talking about pretty much the same thing? In Genesis 3, is it that God hiccuped so Moses wrote it twice? Even if it's the flood, or if it's creation, or what Moses wrote, those are just some ideas that pop into your head. Go to your scripture, look them up, and try to find the first place that talks about them, and then look them up on the side in those little notes that says, well, this is also wrote in Matthew, or this is also wrote in Psalm. You've got to do more study than just read. You've got to, I know I say this a lot, but you got to divorce yourself from the brainwashing of your past. She had brainwashing since she was a little kid, all the way up to 10, 15 years ago. And we were both brainwashed to believe what a lot of preachers and teachers have told us. And it isn't that I just all of a sudden started studying. It's just that all of a sudden I started going, why? And then I didn't take anybody's word for it. That's why we tell people, don't believe what we say. What were you going to say?
And you got to be careful when you're doing your study not to rely on the internet.
Yeah, the internet is not a great place to do your study.
It might be a good reference for things.
If you type in Satan or flood or
even the word you had today,
Septuagint or creation, they may give you 25, 35, 40 different places to look. And in all reality, you could use those places to start your study. Don't always believe what they say on the internet. Because the person on the internet, just like anybody else, he's been brainwashed, believes that his way is totally right, and he's going to tell you that you've got to believe like him. Talk.
Hi, guys.
But
anyway,
we thought Septuagint had to be explained because when Dallas said it last week, I know that there was a lot of people that were going, or unless it just flew over your head. If it flew over your head, then I'm talking a bunch of stuff, and you're going, "What did he bring that up for?"
I'd never heard that word before.
But if you read it last week and you went, "What is that?" We wanted to make sure you just didn't write it off as somebody else's idea.
So, any comments? Any questions?
I know it's kind of a deep subject today, but
and are you gonna
preachers and teachers, like Tom said, they do tell their truth, but it's not always the truth. No, I'm not saying every time a preacher talks, he's spitting out lies. No, he's telling you what he's been brainwashed, or his denominational philosophy or church doctrine has told him how he has to believe.
And it doesn't mean that it's wrong.
No, doesn't mean that it's wrong, but it does mean that you need to study to try to find out exactly what.
So it shouldn't be something that we take on blind faith.
No, nothing comes by blind faith. I guess you could say that's one of the reasons why we tell people don't believe what we say, because we don't want you to believe in us with blind faith. We want you to do your own study, your own looking up, your own work. It is interesting once you get started. It's so rewarding when a person finally gets an answer and you get the feeling, I never knew that before, or I never looked at it that way before. Or you have somebody sitting across the table and the person goes, wow, that's got to be right. That's logical. Why wouldn't it happen that way?
Well, and seriously, even the stuff you talk about, I think you want them to take notes and check on you.
Yeah.
Study.
I wouldn't believe what I said.
You keep saying that.
I wouldn't. I'd want to look them up. I usually give you 4 or 5 verses to places to look up, and if I don't, I give you words, and you can look up the words. But find out what it is. Find out what I'm talking about. Find out where in the world some of this old buzzard got that stuff. But get it. Okay, now
next week.
No, I'm going to talk about something that I've stated in the last few weeks that the government has been taken. You've got mayors and governors who say they're closing churches. Now, if you want to go to church, that is backed by the First Amendment. If you allow a mayor or a governor or a senator or congressman to tell you can't go to church, then it's breaking the First Amendment of the Constitution. They're going again. Then you're saying to that mayor, it's okay. See how easy it was when the pandemic or COVID-19, when the mayor says, well, we can't go to church because they're going to spread the COVID. People went, well, yeah, we got to stay home because we can't. That's breaking. That's doing away with the First Amendment to the Constitution. They're taking, now I'm not saying that, we got to do this or that. I'm saying that if we allow any politician to just do away with our Constitution, then guess what? That's our fault. They shouldn't be able to do that. And if you stand back and go, well, they did it to protect everybody, well, how easy will it be to do away with a lot of the parts of the Constitution? You have the right to assemble, freedom of religion. You have a right for peaceful joining together. We can't let politicians take away our constitutional rights to assemble. And when you have have you noticed when you've seen on TV that all these organizations that want you to send money for other places and old people and young people, and the advertisements that's going on TV right now, it's because the pandemic, you got to take this medicine, or give money for this organization because they help the old people. And they use the same commercials they did before the pandemic. I don't like it when they pad their advertisement because of a disastrous thing that happened. I had to get that off my chest.
Okay.
To me, it's not even kosher to do something like that. If you want to go to church, you should be able to go to church. If you want to assemble, you should be able to assemble. Peaceful demonstration, peaceful coming together.
Well, that's just something that popped up in the background. Anyway.
See, when we allow them to take things away so easily because of something that's happened, how much more are they going to take away? It'll be more than just your going to church. But they can't do that according to the Constitution. And now I'm going to say something that people are going to go, oh, that's politics. If they, mayor, governor, senator, or congressman, I don't care if they're Republican or Democrat, tell you can't do something because of the pandemic or whatever, and it's against the Constitution, I don't care what party they're on. Vote them out. That's being a statement that says we got to do what we got to do to keep our Constitution. You can't turn on the news without hearing. The only thing you hear about is the pandemic. Did all the rest of the world just stop? Did all the rest of the problems cease? No. We still have them. But they want to push that one thing, who has caused less deaths than the flu does every year. She's told me I shouldn't talk about this, but I had to. I think it's disgraced. I think we need to stand up for our Christian values and our Christian way of life. And if you want to go to church, you should be able to. Next week.
Okay. What you gonna give
I
a
know,
little preview of next week?
Look, she's even sitting away from me.
Well, I started coughing.
She's
You gonna give him a little
preview of next week.
Hint of next week. It's gonna be very interesting.
It could get very deep. And you're gonna look at it and possibly say, that guy's nuts. But it could get very deep.
I'm sure they said that before.
When we start talking about the garden again. Okay. Got that off my chest, off my head. Falls off my head pretty fast.
Anyway, so next week?
It might be the garden. And when I talk about the garden, you people will be surprised
What that little light bulb showed you?
Yeah, what that little light bulb showed me. I respect each one of you. I think it's great that you come on here and listen to this old buzzard talk with his honey sitting next to him. I don't know where we'll be next Tuesday. I don't know where we might be here. We might be out on the road. We want to know. I want to let each one of you people know that we appreciate you being on. And if you do come up with a question, you guys are on my Facebook, right?
Yes.
And the ones in the park can just stop me and say, hey, what do you think you're doing? But I love it when I'm studying or the questions that people ask. But if you're throwing at denominational philosophy and church doctrine at me, I'll give you an answer, but don't keep harping it. So, hopefully you turn in next week. Hopefully you'll tell your friends. We haven't seen too many people post these things.
Yeah, like it.
The reach out of the government is troubling, just like losing the Second Amendment. Thank you for bringing it up. All right, I got one comment. Thanks,
Hey.
Rich. You're okay. I don't care what she says about you.
He knows.
Okay.
Anyway, guys, like it, share it,
Post
invite
it,
all
do
your
whatever you
friends
can.
and family, enemies, whoever.
We usually get 75 to 120
So-
views on it.
Come share it with us. I figured out how to put it on YouTube, so all the videos are over on the YouTube site, just in case you know somebody doesn't have Facebook. They can get on that too. So, anywho, you guys have an awesome week.
Here's the Constitution. It says Congress shall make no law representing any establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abiding the freedom of speech or the press or the right for people to peacefully to assemble and to petition the government of the readiness of grievances. That's the First Amendment. Talks about religion. They shouldn't be able to tell us not to do it. Second one, that's bear arms. But anybody wants one of these little books, I'll be up Tom's area. Anybody wants one around here, I'll be on. I'll get you one. Thank you. Constitution and the Bible. Could you ever think they could work together? Some old buzzard on here talking about both. We love you.
Thank you guys. Have an awesome week. We will see you next Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time.
Did I push this little button?
Yes.
Okay. Love you. Bye.